Aloha mai kako. I'm sorry I can't be with you all in person this week, but hopefully it gives you a little more flexibility to do some of the exercises that one of the exercises that I'm gonna ask you all to experiment this week. So we have three students from the class who are going to be offering presentations, and you can record it something like this. You can do it audio, however you want to. I'm just using PowerPoint and hitting the record function. But if you're just doing audio, you could even just do it on voice memo, or you could find another way. So many tools nowadays. So after those folks share with us in the discussion thread, you'll be posting responses to the video presentations as well as just to the readings themselves. And then in this section, what I'm doing is on the syllabus, it says workshop, writing ethnographic field notes. So this presentation is focused specifically on that process of getting started with writing and capturing ethnographic field notes. And then at the end, you'll see there's an exercise to go and try out capturing ethnographic field notes. So I sort of was trained, I'm not an anthropologist, but I was really interested in ethnographic methods, having had a dissertation chair, who was trained as a historian of anthropology and had done a lot of different kinds of ethnography, conventional and experimental. So this idea that comes out of Geertz's interpretation of cultures is one of those kind of foundational ideas that inform the way I think about ethnography, from taking something from a passing event which occurs in its own moment of occurrence, which exists only in its own moment of occurrence, into an account, a written account, which exists in its inscriptions and can be reconsulted. And of course, I say writing, but there are also various ways, right, of creating an account or telling the story. And so when we think about getting from the process of experiencing an event or a community, a culture in process, a political phenomenon, how do you get from that to some sort of a written product, like a dissertation, which you all will have to be writing? So the field notes are about writing down, as this says here, and this is a really helpful, very practical kind of text, writing ethnographic field notes. Writing in systematic ways what you're observing and learning while participating in the daily rounds of life of others. Thus, the researcher creates an accumulating written record of these observations and experiences. And it's that process of accumulation. And in one of the readings we had last week, they talked about, when is enough? There isn't really a sort of standard of how long is the time that you have to spend in immersion or writing field notes, but really thinking about this accumulation of data such that you get to see patterns starting to emerge, and you get to toward an interpretation and claims that you feel you can make based on your work and your research. So what are field notes? They are both these raw records, and they are the seeds for the analytic insights that you will offer in your writing when you are actually producing the ethnography or the narrative account that is not only descriptive of what happened, but has analytical power, right? That it is contributing to people's understandings of the world, of a community, of a culture, of a political process, all those things. And then for yourself, I really find the process of writing field notes a powerful tool for observing, that when I know that I'm not just going to be kind of there, but I'm actually going to be recording and writing down what's happening, what do I see, what am I feeling, what am I experiencing, what are some of the insights that are beginning to emerge, what are patterns that I'm seeing between what I'm watching here and maybe conversations or interviews that I had in an earlier phase of the research or on another day. So I feel like the process itself of writing, recording is this tool for deep observation and deep thinking. And there are multiple forms, as we'll talk about, with regard to how ethnographic field notes can look and how you go about capturing them. But they are typically descriptive, can be evocative, reflexive on your own thinking, your own position, how your orientation to that particular moment, that particular day, those interactions may be shaping what you're documenting. And then also mnemonic in terms of like helping you think back later to what happened. Yeah, so a tool for your memory for your future writing phases. So you want to be striving for detail and accuracy while you are writing or capturing, note-taking, while also realizing that notes are always partial. And what you want to strive for is they're reliable, but situated. Reliable and situated. They're reliable from your particular perspective, and you recognize that that situatedness and that they are not the whole story. So there is no single perfect field note. There's no correct format, although there are many guides and templates that you could use and follow, but you really should experiment and see what works for you. And I also think that it's pretty standard for it to be recommended that you should take notes as soon as possible, during or immediately after the observation. The longer time goes on, the more, our memories are not, our memories have ways of shaping knowledge, right? So we want to try to capture what we're thinking as quickly as possible in that moment, which isn't to say you can't go back and do historical kinds of ethnography, but if you are doing that mode of working with living folks in process, then that is the recommendation, as soon as possible. Also with the recognition that our own lives can be sites of inquiry. So there's also a real robust and growing, I would say, literature in autoethnography. And here I have just a real short excerpt from Hazel Carby's book, Imperial Intimacies, where you can see an example of her recalling experience from her childhood that she is bringing forward along with this really robust research process that she says took about 10 years of thinking through her family, how the histories of enslavement and colonialism and imperialism inform her own family dynamics, and that how that helps us think about larger questions in relation to specifically here British imperialism in Jamaica and at home in the empire. So you can see just a sort of a quick example here of her going back to this memory. And so thinking about autoethnography as one possible method as well. So why do field notes matter? Field notes are data. They provide evidentiary basis. They're going to be the foundation for your ethnographic analysis, for the more completed writing that you do. They are raw though, right? And then you are going to go back and sort of write them up and put more finishing detail and thought. And then you're going to get to the point where you have your, more polished narrative later. But your field notes are your record of these events that are fleeting. They help your own memory. They can also be sites of creativity and experimentation. So depending on the researcher, some people are also including in their notes just the creative space for adding what they're thinking in conversation with what they're recording as being happening, live. And then, of course, you want to always be considering the ethical dimensions as you're going into a space. Do you have the consent to capture? How is your capturing in whatever way you're capturing, whether it's note-taking or photos, impacting the interactions that you're having? And then in the aftermath of writing everything up, what is going to happen to those data that you have collected? Can this data be vulnerable to legal processes or state repression? And how do you protect those who may be recorded in your data? And so depending on what you're studying, these questions become quite important, or sometimes lesser important, depending on their context. But things you always want to think through for sure. And this is an obvious one, but there's just no natural way to write while you are participating and observing. So in the case of the seeds we planted, which I'm going to read a short excerpt from in a little bit in this presentation, it's not natural to have a notebook while you're in a lo'i with students and others who are working, right? So you have to be thoughtful about when it is that you're recording and how you're recording. Are you going to take time on the side after participating in an activity to write? Are you going to wait until you've left everyone and you get to the car? Are you going to just let people know that, hey, I'm going to be walking around and taking notes? Or are you going to engage one of the other participants, one of the students or a group, in collectively doing this work together of documenting? So thinking about how you want to intentionally go about this while understanding that you have to flow, because you're working with living people who are living their lives, and it is a little bit awkward to have somebody with a notebook or a camera or a microphone. That said, some of the core things that you want to capture in your notes are what is the basic context and organization of your notes? Yeah, so the basic context, meaning date, where are you, when are you, who is there, why are you there, what's happening, kind of the basics of what it is that you're going to be reflecting on. And then thinking about organization for your notes, keeping page numbers. Are you keeping it in a notebook? I think a certain amount can be digitized, but some may not be able to. It really depends on your context and your comfort level with different tools. For me, I'm old school as an old Gen X person, where I do like notebooks. They're easy to carry. There are times when notebooks don't work that well, and phones can help here with like voice memos or quick notes on your phone. But I do like the old school notebooks and being able to write and sketch and then see everything and flip through page after page. There's something about that works for me. But having page numbers or date numbers to help you stay organized. Then you want the specific facts, right? Who was present? Was there a title of the event? Like, are you at the chanting of the Kumulipo at Iolani Palace? Was there a title of that event? Later on, it might be harder to go back and find what the title of the event was if there's an event with a title. Or was there a sequence of things or an agenda that you want to make sure you include? So some of those specifics you want to make sure these are the parts that you want to have accuracy. And then you get into the things like descriptive details and sensory impressions that are really specific to your perspective on the events. So thinking about sights, sounds, textures, smells, tastes, all of those things. How can you later, when you're producing the written account, capture and recreate this context for your reader? How can you bring them into it? And as we've talked about a little bit before, there will be details that you will want to include later once you know what the overarching themes are, but you're not going to know what those details are until you get there. So capturing as many details as possible gives you more choices later as an author. What are the interactions and dialogues that you have? So if you're in a participant observation sort of situation, whether you are talking with DJs at nightclubs or whether you are talking with hula dancers behind the scenes at Merry Monarch or getting ready for a ceremony, if there are dialogues that you have and you can remember, or you have the opportunity to capture direct quotes, snippets of speech that can later be utilized as the direct words of someone that you interacted with, that can be really helpful. Even including your own words, like I asked this, they said this, and this was my reaction. Capturing those in as much detail as you can, including body language, will really help you as you're creating the ethnographic account later. And if you can't, obviously, if you're note taking, you're not going to be able to have verbatim all of the conversations, but summarize, right? What did you talk about with this person at this time? And then including those key snippets of direct quotes when you can. And then also you want to be thinking about your own position, your reactions, your feelings. Did you come into this situation and you're like, oh, this is a really uncomfortable chair that I'm sitting in, and that is shaping the way that you receive whatever it is that you're hearing? You want to be note-taking what your personal responses are to what you are encountering. And again, it may seem like this might not be that important later, but it might be. It might be really important, and you won't know until you have this accumulation of data. And then, do you have like hunches? Do things start coming up, especially as you're going through the process of your fieldwork over weeks and months? Things start to connect, right? Oh, I remember when they've said this, it takes me back to this conversation that I had. So noting that as it's happening in real time or just after as you're reflecting can be really helpful. What are those analytic hunches, those seeds that you want to make sure to note so that later on when you're writing up, you have them? And that can also include questions. Are there persistent questions that, you keep bumping up against? Or are there maybe just fleeting questions like, hey, what's Auntie's last name? I didn't catch it. I got to make sure that I get this later. Persistent or fleeting questions will give you doors to continue opening through the research. So that said, as far as the actual notes, there are different ways that people capture these, but some major kind of categories of things: jottings, which are like your sensory reflections, your descriptions of the events, all of those things, the snippets of speech, those are all jottings, right? Sketches of what's the layout like? How are people organized in the space? When I have students my undergrads go to different legislative hearings or government board and commission meetings, I have them think about what is the physical space, how is it organized, and then actually sketch that out, right? The context, because that may matter. And it will definitely help you when you're trying to recreate the situation later. Questions, and then emerging insights and connections. So you can have sections in your notebook for these things on a page, or you can have a symbol system of, every time you have a question, you're going to make a big question mark, or whatever it is that you use to help organize your own thinking. There's the Cornell note-taking system, right? That's kind of like a 3-part thing that has, like, the main section is just your notes of what's happening, your descriptive capture, and then the side can be like your questions or insights, and then the bottom can be the summary. So if you just Google Cornell method for note-taking, that's it's a method for just note-taking in general, but it could be something that you could adapt. So there are many, many templates out there for what you can actually, how to organize, if you want organization on the page. Some people just like very free flow, and that's okay too. And what I've been sharing about just now is really kind of assuming that you're using a regular old notebook, like I like to use, but there are so many ways that ethnographers and researchers who use ethnographic methods are capturing so-called data now, that are not just in notebooks with pen and pencil, where you want to think about the capturing as this multimodal practice that can be beyond just printed or written text. So that can include, creating maps, charts, looking at photos, capturing photos, asking participants to capture photos, similar to the photo voice method, audio recordings, ephemera that may be part of events that you attend. Back in the day, it used to be like actual flyers. Now there might be digital flyers. So thinking also about digital notebooks, is there a digital notebook software that you use or that you want to use and get comfortable with? I use Evernote, but you don't have to use any particular. You can just use regular old notes, that's whatever's the free program. And then there are many other types of note-taking software. I would just caution that if you are going to use a note-taking software that utilizes AI, that you make sure that you understand what the usage is of the data that you input into that software. Voice memos to yourself. So that can be utilized if you're in the field, or even if you're kind of doing more autoethnographic work, right? Like just to capture your own thinking at different times of the day, if you're thinking more about your own experience. And then other possible autoethnographic materials, if you're doing the kind of work like Hazel Carby was, or others who do autoethnography, you could be looking for old letters, old emails, old journals, old social media posts, whatever you can get your hands on to help you remember or immerse back into a moment that you are trying to recapture and write about or think about in relation to other series of events or larger structures. Ethics and field notes, critical to think about in advance and throughout the process. Who owns the notes in the end? Are you going to destroy them? If not, how are you going to protect them? Will they be shared? There are different practices of open ethnography and live field noting that I'll note right at the end of this presentation. So for you to think about like collective forms of ownership, or trusted groups of collaborators, or just simply destroying them. But again, as I mentioned earlier, thinking through the specific context of your research, because notes can be potentially incriminating evidence depending on what it is that you're studying, and who you're studying with, and you just want to think that through. But some ways that researchers have addressed this is to anonymize or to utilize symbols or acronyms, initials for individuals if you don't want to list names, or pseudonyms. To also have composites or collages of multiple individuals. So critical race methods utilize this form of drawing on the experiences of multiple people to create a composite counter narrative. Also, techniques of just simply refusal as resistance and as method, as Audra Simpson writes about in Mohawk Interruptus, where you may just, at times, it's not the time to capture anything. It's just the time to be there. And then later, you can reflect on whether it's appropriate to write in a sort of more journalist, like a journaling kind of form about your reflections on that, or maybe not at all. And then participatory field notes in trusted communities. There's so many tools now that make it way easier to collaborate. So are you wanting to work with people to create field notes? And some of those emerging approaches to collaboration are named here in sort of overlapping practice. That live field noting link is an interesting reflection on an ethnographer who was traveling through China. She talks about how, or they talk about how they were, it was difficult at times to be sure about whether things were going to be recorded, because of course you want, reliable recording of whatever it is that you're doing. So they began to use Instagram and posting as they were going along as a form of field noting. And I imagine that you can set that to private if you don't want it to be public, but some people do advocate, depending on the project and the context in which you're working, for open ethnography or public ethnography, where you're not just sort of creating your own private field notes and then later writing something up that's going to be published, and the field notes remain secret for all time, no one else sees them, but you're actually kind of making the process itself more transparent. So the field noting process in a live field noting situation, or it could be a more limited basis of collaborative ethnography or participatory field noting, where that process is transparent to a bounded group of people, but not everybody, not wide open public access. So lots of different kinds of approaches and options there. And then finally, before I get into one quick example, is practical tips to getting started. So if you've never done ethnography before, or if you're like an experienced field note taker, hopefully you'll find something useful in what I've shared, as well as in these practical reminders and tips to, number one, determine what your tools are going to be before you start out. And then also acknowledge that as the process unfolds, you might find that you need new tools. So if it's your notebook or your phone or a camera or a voice recorder or an iPad, whatever it is that you decide is going to be like a primary tool, you want to carry that around with you all the time. I think it's really important to be able to have at least one of those tools on hand, so that as ideas pop into your mind, you can, quick voice memo or quick note in your small notebook determine what are the tools that you're going to utilize. Write early, write often. Again, the sooner you capture, the more detail you'll be able to call up, and the less likely it is that you'll imagine, right, things that didn't actually happen. And it's nice to be able to capture specific kinds of details that when you're recreating the context will be nice ways to call that moment back into being. So, you know, the color of someone's shirt, or the way they tilted their head after they said something. All of those kinds of things are things that you may not remember later, but in the moment as it's happening, you know, you might be able to capture them. And then after the immediate moment, then you want to, even if you have your notebook out and I'm like at the palace and I'm watching this Kumulipo chanting unfold and I'm taking notes about what's happening, who are the people around me, what are the interactions that are going on, what are the interactions that I'm having. Even if I'm doing all of that in real time there at the palace, when I go home or even when I'm in the car, I want to spend a little bit more time like processing through that, and going through what I have, filling in the gaps, writing initial themes or connections that you may come to. So give yourself time for that as well. When I would book interviews, I would always make sure that I had time for the interview and then time after that. So I don't have to rush off to something else, but I do have time to just sit with it and digest and process a little bit and capture some of my own thinking before rushing off into the next thing. Capture first, polish later. Don't worry about perfection as you're in a moment. Yeah, just capturing. Don't censor yourself. Begin to develop your own shorthand, your own abbreviations or symbols, and then try to be consistent with it so that every time you see a star, you know that it means this, or every time you have the initials JN, you know which JN it is. And then experiment. I am not very artistic visually, but you know, some people love to draw and doodle, and I've seen some really cool projects that I'm thinking of Ka'imi Watson's dissertation, where in his whole process he was also like doodling and drawing and creating art alongside, and that became part of the dissertation as well. So be experimental, and if you are creative more than I am, you know, use that as part of the creative process, because ethnographies are science and art. Backup and secure. Make sure that you capture something, double check to make sure something's recording if you want to get it recorded. I have definitely been in my own personal life and in the field of research known at times to think I pressed record, but I actually didn't press record, and then when I go to press stop, I start recording the interlude in between when the things that I'm trying to actually capture. So don't do that. Just double check yourself and back up your information. I've also known people who have gotten to the point of writing their entire dissertation and their laptop dying, and they didn't have a backup. So I would triple backup your data, back it up on a hard drive, back it up on the cloud, and and have it on your own internal hard drive in your computer. Try to dedicate time daily or weekly to looking over your notes. So the power of ethnography is the immersion, and you can stay in the immersion by sitting with your notes regularly. And then makahana ka'ike. Capturing field notes is a skill that is only honed through practice, so you got to do it. You just have to try it out and see what works for you. And read. You know, there are also a lot of resources out there, both websites online and a few books that are like, here's the naked field notes, here's my process laid bare. There's a couple books that are called like Naked Field Notes or something like that. And you can actually see their publications of people's raw field notes with some reflection and thinking on top of that. So what I thought I'd do to close this is just share a little bit from one example of a journey from field notes to ethnography, or the narrative account of a moment, and just kind of point you to some things that might be hopefully useful. So this excerpt is from my book, The Seeds We Planted, from chapter 4, which is on the Va'a program at Halau Kumana. And it was, or it is called Enlarging Hawaiian Worlds, Va'a Travels Against Currents of Belittlement. And this came through many years of being part of the school, but then really focused fieldwork for one academic year. So that included attending classes with various classes, sitting in, interviewing teachers, interviewing graduates. I didn't have IRB approval to interview students because if you're interviewing minors and in the public schools, it is quite an involved process. But I was able to sit in and experience and take notes about what was happening in the classroom without naming specific individual students. So in this write-up, what you see is, context from the beginning, like the when are we? So I would have had to make sure that I'm noting in my notebook, in my field notes, when is this? Where are we? We're at Kualoa. Who's there? This happened to be the very first day of the 6th and 7th grade class venturing into the world of Va'a during this particular school year. So, if you do a whole year's worth of fieldwork, you have a lot of written material, maybe at the very least one full notebook, maybe multiple. So having those kinds of details noted is essential. I also talk here about the way that I arrived into this particular moment, because I thought it was important not just to signal who was there with me, but also because it picks up on some themes that come up around Mo'oku Auhau. So for me to have my children there is something that I thought was important to note. And then I talk here about who the teachers were. It was important to name them, and I got consent to name them. You'll see here a direct quote. The Va'a of our generation began from this beach. Hokule'a first touched the water here. That was something that in those moments, as it's all unfolding, I'm trying to capture as she's, explaining. So in that particular context, all the kids were sitting and taking notes and observing. And so it was a great time for me to pull out my notebook and to be able to take notes too, because it didn't seem so awkward. Everybody else had notebooks out. But there were other points in that day where I didn't have my notebook out, where I put it away. But while I did have it out, I thought great opportunity to get some, direct quotes. And so that was something that Anu had said, Kumu Anu had said. And then I mentioned how this particular visit is situated in the context of their larger curriculum and the school context, which is really situated in a larger educational movement. And then what you see in this is about a page later, so I go through and describe in the ethnography, in the written account of it, right? I kind of set up that context that you see on that earlier slide, and then talk a little bit about what happens there, just the accounting of, okay, then they do their chant, this is what it means for them, then here's like the sequence of events throughout the day. And then I go back in the account that is published to a conversation that I had about the teacher's approach to what they're doing. And so that connects this moment to the why. And so share here in the writing that even though the state standards do not, they're very time bound, the state standards, where it doesn't require teachers to go back to an earlier moment at this particular phase. That she says, how do we do this place-based learning if we're not connected to Oahu first? And she says, I had to take it back before the unifications of the islands under Kamehameha. So that was direct quotes from an interview that I had done with her and transcribed. I can't remember now if it was before or after, but it wasn't near in time to this specific moment. So then I talk a little bit about, I just paraphrasing and describing what Kumahelani is sharing with her students. And why do I pick this particular moment at all? And why do I give a lot of space to this particular account is because the point that is made here at the end, it was important for the Opio to know that Kualoa has long been a place for raising leaders and a crucial site of seeking and maintaining sovereignty. So that becomes a large theme in the book overall. And then going back into, okay, what are all these things that I've captured? Do I want to write a lot about the day that they were doing reef transect studies, or do I want to do a lengthy thing about a day when they were with particular kumu? But this one was a nice way to pose an entry into thinking about their study, as well as to bring out important themes. And so that's kind of where you get to once you're in that narrative phase of crafting the narrative, is you've pulled out what the themes are that and then you're looking back through what you have already, annotated in your own notes of where those themes emerge. And then you can pull those moments out and, write them up, craft them into a narrative that is publishable. So that is just one example. Thanks for listening through this presentation. Now it's your opportunity to go and exercise, practice, makahana ka'ike, the field noting process. So the invitation here is to do an observation. A brief one can be, 30 to 60 minutes or so, in a setting that you can easily access. All the better if it's related somehow to your project or your interests. And it doesn't have to be a live face-to-face setting. It can be a digital conversation. I put here as an example that back and forth that's been taking place between Son of Oahu and Haole Go Home on Instagram. Just tracking, like when, what, how, who, what were the comments. There are so many things that you could observe in that context, and noting them, right? So you want to write your field notes either as it's happening, if it's possible, or right after, capturing all the things that I talked about, or some of the things that I talked about, and then sitting with them for a little bit and reflecting. And then what I'm asking you to do is just take a picture of your notes or some part of your notes and share it. I created a Padlet that you'll have the link to here, and you're going to share that excerpt or that image of your naked field notes, and then just a short reflection of what you found, what the process was like, what are you learning about capturing ethnographic field notes, whether it's just with humans or like the readings are calling us to think about also, digital ethnography and multi-species ethnography, recognizing that our worlds are, our social worlds are not just human ones. And then after everyone's posted their notes, if you can go back, take a look, what did you notice? What do you think? Oh, that's cool. I wish I had done that. Or what can you learn from the various kinds of styles and approaches that people are taking to the note-taking process? Okay, looking forward to seeing what you all come up with on Lamaku, and I will see you back in Saunders in a week or so. Aloha, hui hou.